Hey everyone, Alan Brochstein from New Cannabis Ventures and 420 Investor bringing you your weekly update as well as a preview of the newsletter we publish at New Cannabis Ventures each Sunday. During the week, we run curated press releases. These tend to be on capital raises, M&A, and financial reporting. It was very light this week. We also run proprietary content, which tends to be our interviews, updates on our indices, and market updates. So I'll get to those in a moment. We had just two curated press releases that met our criteria to be included in the newsletter tomorrow. The first one was another capital raise, a new issue. This was extending on the theme of increased capital being available to the industry. Chicago Atlantic, a mortgage REIT, went public, raising $100 million on the NASDAQ. So I dig that a lot. They've been very active in the industry. Most recently, they were behind a pretty large loan to Verano Holdings that was announced, I believe, in November. The other press release we ran was regarding Cresco Labs closing its $80 million acquisition, which was announced 2 months ago in Pennsylvania of Laurel Harvest. Laurel Harvest was a research applicant, and this gives Cresco the right it gives them additional manufacturing capacity as well as the right to open another 3 stores. So this continues a trend that we've seen in the space with MSOs leaning hard on Pennsylvania, which continues to be a large medical market that could go adult use. As it relates to our proprietary content, we did publish 2 interviews this week. The first one was with Ray Chang at Agrify. This was a follow-up to our interview that we published in February after they went public. The company went public at 10. It's trading around 13.5, I believe, right now, a little bit above the IPO price, which is spectacular considering what's happened in the market since then, and a little bit below where they raised capital in the secondary. The interview is interesting because he did talk about how the company, they had done a lot of acquisitions, 2 big acquisitions recently, and he alluded to doing some more, and they announced one a couple of days later. It wasn't very large, $9 million, but this was giving good insight into one of the new ancillary names in the space. And then the other interview was with the CEO of Jushi, and I had listened to the call in November, and the company did a good job of really differentiating themselves, I think, on that call, really talking about a lot of the nuts and bolts at Jushi and how the story has evolved. And on the interview, Jim really went into detail about each of the markets in which they're involved and explained a lot about how the company has beefed up its management team, raised its access to capital, and how it's really refined its go-to-market strategy in some of these markets. So those were our 2 interviews. Carrie does a great job with these interviews, and we tried something different this week, and she did a long-form piece where she worked with 8 industry leaders to develop an overview of how the cannabis industry is evolving towards a more CPG-focused industry. And so that's linked in our newsletter as well. And then finally, I mentioned we do these market updates, and this week I provided a market update for Illinois. The Illinois market in November, they give very up-to-date information, did contract slightly from October, but by less than you would expect given the number of days. But I think when it's all said and done, the growth there, I think, was 61%. It's good, but it is decelerating. When you throw in the medical market from a year ago, that data came out after we published the article. I think that year-over-year growth is in the low 40s for the combined medical and adult use. That market continues to struggle with a lack of dispensaries, and the state delayed and delayed and delayed, finally awarded new licenses, but this whole process is tied up in court right now, and there's been no final license awards. So that was really the news this week. It was kind of a light week. I usually start these videos off with a brief overview of what happened in the market this week. So I'll do that now before I finish up with how I usually finish up, which is a discussion of the topic we discussed in the newsletter. In the markets this week, sure felt like they were down, but in fact they weren't. So what happened this week was we came in Monday morning, and indeed we did extend to the downside, but we quickly rallied. We ended up making a new closing low by just a few pennies. So we recovered those early losses on the global cannabis stock index, but it was a new closing low Monday. We rocketed higher on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then on Thursday and Friday, we gave up most of those gains. The net of all of this was a 1.4% gain in the global cannabis stock index, which, as I said, felt like a decline, but in fact was a rally. The big news kind of driving stocks perhaps in the week was at the end of the day, the Senate version of the National Defense Authorization Act did not include safe banking. I never expected it would, and I'm not so sure it would have been that meaningful anyway. But this is something people have been hyper focused on, and I was a little bit fearful that the market would sell off after that news. In fact, it rallied and then sold off later, so kind of weird. Maybe it rallied because it didn't sell off immediately. Who knows? The week was also characterized by lighter volume. I believe that we're seeing a lot of tax loss selling and window dressing. I spoke about this last week. This window dressing idea is really playing out, in my view. Again, what window dressing is, it's the process by where institutional managers, and these are the folks that tend to be more in large LPs as well as ancillary companies, and they don't want to look like losers by holding these stocks at year end that are way down. So they'll just sell them so that they don't have to look stupid to their shareholders. So their loss, I think, but we'll see. And I think that's a little bit of what's been going on. Lighter volume, tax loss selling, window dressing, and really not a lot of news flow right now. And unfortunately, there won't really be for the balance of the year, most likely. So just to conclude, each week we try to share a little bit of insight, a little bit of perspective. And this week, we went back to something we published the first week of the year, January 3rd. And recall this was ahead of the Georgia elections. So there was a wild card there about how the year would play out. But we shared what we thought were 9 potential drivers of higher prices over the year. And so in this piece this week, we went back and kind of reviewed how these 9 factors played out. I think certainly 5 of them we were spot on. A couple of them definitely we missed, and maybe 2 other ones hard to judge, but I just went with no. So kind of a mixed bag there, but maybe more importantly, when you're doing these prognostications, there's things you can think about and project, but what about the things you don't think about? So that's what we really covered this week. 5 things that really surprised cannabis investors, or certainly surprised us this year. So kind of interesting, and maybe a little bit of a prelude to a few weeks from now, we'll kind of do something similar, I suspect, where we'll talk about the year ahead. At New Cannabis Ventures, we're always looking forward to, we don't use the calendar year end is the one and only time to do that. We try to do that every single week, but it is kind of interesting at this time of the year to look back, see what you got right, what you got wrong, and start to think about things ahead. So I want to wish everybody a good week ahead. Take care, everybody.